Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are Debate Sensei. We are two today. We got Tim from San Diego State University. All right. I am Jared Kabika Miller, your professor and coach of debate.
Where's Matt tonight?
Matt, he's starting a new venture. He's opening up a cork soaking facility. So for like wine corks, it needs to be the right consistency and viscosity. So he is getting into the cork soaking business. He's a cork soaker.
What a nerd, but
Yeah.
love him for it.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right. So this topic is brought to you by the National Parliamentary Tournament of Excellence. It is a tournament that I hold near and dear to my heart. Great memories from that tournament.
You did okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, but I do appreciate the tournaments that have like a qualifier to them. I like qualifiers, you know what I mean? And so you kind of have to earn your spot into the tournament first, and then you move on from there. Man, I wish there was a way of just cataloging all the debates that are happening. Is it this weekend?
Mm-hmm. So it's always the second or third weekend, and this time they happen to do the first weekend in March.
Okay, man.
So bids are already out. People already know. They're like already prepping files and submitting stuff off. Like they're in the thick of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to just kind of sit in the room of some of these rounds, because I mean these are people that are putting some rigorous and disciplined thought into their approach to arguments, and even if you're not winning everything, you know what I mean. It's like I just like hearing. I like hearing people's ideas. All right, and not just on pop culture and sports, but complicated stuff, not even political stuff, but I like the complicated stuff.
Yeah.
So to be a fly on the wall. But
so I do believe that the final rounds are live streamed. So I think elims through finals, I believe, are live streamed. So
we should find a way to like carry that, or to spread it to people that watch us.
We can certainly share that out on our channels, and
I mean, if as long as we're given permission, you know what I mean.
It's I mean, there's we literally share the YouTube link of hey, go here to check out the live NPT debates.
Let's try to remember to do that. All right, but if not, go look it up, everybody. Listen, when I say complicated, I mean complicated. These people are bright. All right, getting to the final round, because if that's all you can see is the final round, they are sharp, man. It's like I wouldn't be able to keep up with them.
So the topics are wide ranging, everything from mining of rare earth minerals to I know last week you spoke about Ukraine and Russia.
That was timely, very timely. I mean, the invasion was freaking happening as we were broadcasting. That was wild.
Yeah. I mean, so they're covering a good breadth, but the specific resolution that we're talking about tonight is the United Nations should amend the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons to prohibit the use of unmanned combat aerial vehicles.
I think these are the type of topics that scare my students, like the people that are you're in week 3, week 4 of the, and you're wondering, what is my professor going to make me talk about? That would probably scare people to death. You know what I mean? And so, and I understand why it's complicated. So we're going to try to tease that apart today.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of pieces to it, and I think that is part of what makes a good topic. Is there's a lot of important segments that need to be defined, and then therefore, of course, grounds for topicality if those things are misdefined or kind of skewed in their definition. So first, United Nations is fairly straightforward, but amend the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. So what is the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons? Though it did come out of the Redundancy School of Redundancy.
I know. That's funny, because it's two uses of the word convention.
They thought they were being very clever.
Yeah. The more I study language, the more times I come into examples of this where it's that's just a bad use of language. And you know, I mean, like we can do better.
So,
anyways, but
so what is that?
okay, so one way to think about defining terms is operationally defining them. I think like saying is like yeah, you're not going to learn anything through the title. You're going to learn it through the history, right? And so this is a set of international laws that came together in the 1980s. You can find all this on a freaking wiki if you wanted to, which is like I still do it. I still do it. You know what I mean? To find out my information. But it's to ban certain weapons that are over the top, basically. If I was just going to put it in really simple terms, it's kind of like that is excessive.
Yeah.
And so you have things like mines and booby traps and incendiary weapons and like lasers that blind people and stuff like that. And so it's just
a lot of chemical weapons find their way onto that list too.
Oh yeah.
It's like sarin gas was one that started to get to be a thing, and that was part of what the UN raised issue against Assad in, what was that, 2013, with the line in the sand of like the use of chemical weapons violates this part of the Convention on Conventional Weapons.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm remembering correctly, but I think the question is like whether or not they used like white phosphorus. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah,
like the convention has some fairly specific, you know what I mean, like
examples,
references to things. And so that is that gives a nice context. Like I felt like I learned something when I'm like, oh well, let's take a look at this, you know. And that's one thing I love about debate is like it really forces you to learn new things. I think it's important to notice that they have protocols, and they divide the different weapons into these protocols. Up until now, there are 5. So if I were going to interpret this resolution, I would say add a 6th protocol. And
sure,
that one is,
you
know what I mean? Like, I think
plan.
that one, I like things that are kind of visual, you know what I mean? And that's fairly visual. You can at least visualize an outline where it has, you know, Roman numeral 5, and now we're going to add a Roman numeral 6 to it, you know?
Sure.
So,
and so the purpose of it, so just to give like one kind of summation to it, as they state on the UN website, is to ban or restrict the use of specific types of weapons that are considered to cause unnecessary or unjustifiable suffering to combatants or to affect civilians indiscriminately. That's where I think you end up. That's at least where I would place the foundation for my harm story.
yeah.
So if you're on the affirmative side, you are talking about how armed, unmanned aerial vehicles, so weaponized drones to be, you know, specific, that would be my operational definition of that piece of it. So UAVs, but not surveillance UAVs, armed UAVs, like those with missiles on them, how those cause unnecessary or unjustifiable suffering to, in effect, civilians indiscriminately. So I would start right there, and then you can just get into a whole bunch of like very easily accessible, prevalent, well-cited evidence that says like drones cause a ton of what is really like problematically called collateral damage, but is more specifically civilian death.
Yeah, dead innocent people, like, like you know, just strip it away, right?
I remember some teams that actually had really pre-prepped, just like ready in the can if ever the word collateral damage came out in a round. They're like, that is the like kind of language that allows for civilian death to happen, is when we get to start using these soft little euphemisms like collateral damage, like we, you know, unintended consequences, like no, you killed a school. Like, let's really talk about that and not a statistic on a sheet, but like really unpacking that. And so interesting just critiques sheerly of the language of it, and where that ends up with some pre-fiat implications.
Yeah, I got some stuff on the neg too once we get there.
So starting off with that, I think you build the good harm story of like the stats show that drone strikes do more civilian damage, like they injure and kill more civilians than attacks via manned aircraft. So this is all still operating within the sphere of like, yep, we're still going to be doing this. You know, aerial attacks are still going to be a thing, but in doing so, drones are worse, or drones cause indiscriminate civilian suffering.
Dude, I mean, you're like reading my mind, because I was just reading this foreign policy article from 2016. You know, it came up pretty, and the stats are like 35 times more likely to kill civilians using drones.
Yeah, because in the Obama administration, like Obama was one of the things
God.
that he was criticized the worst for was he just would use drones all over the place, and he was operating off of and like went on record saying like it is that drones are significantly more precise. They called them precise strike or precision strikes.
Yeah,
and, like,
right.
are so much better when the stats show very much the opposite. So it was like 1 in every 75,000 bombs dropped by manned aircraft. At least this was a compilation of stats coming from, I think we probably read the same article, but it was coming from a number of like the Department of Defense, as well as a couple different watch groups. It was like 1 in every 75,000 bombs dropped from a manned aircraft or a like piloted aircraft resulted in civilian casualty, compared to 1 in 1.35 drone strikes included civilian casualty. Like, whoa, like there's some major differences there. So like the numbers total different things, because I think they had piloted aircrafts that were making even more significance, like larger magnitude strikes, but still like the error rate amongst drones compared to piloted were dramatically different.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a really interesting sort of phenomenon when you're doing research on this stuff. You're probably going to come across the same information that your opponent's coming across.
Right. Yeah.
Like you're tasked with interpreting it, from different perspectives, because you don't know what side you're going to be on. I think that's amazing, right? Like when I go back to the term like unmanned combat aerial vehicle, I did go down a little bit of a rabbit hole there where people were having a dispute over whether or not that like autonomous weapons, whether or not drones are autonomous weapons, and whether or not that matters. You know what I mean? Because like the term unmanned combat aerial vehicle is not, man, what am I trying to say? It's not really the number one term that people are using to have this discussion. It seems like more people are using the term autonomous weapons, and so like I'm a little why did they go with that wording there? You know what I mean? And so even though it does bring up drones, you know what I mean? Because I think that makes a whole lot of like that's way more specific on that one, because autonomous stuff would be more than that. But just because it's remotely operated doesn't mean that it's autonomous, right?
Correct. So remotely operated, though, I do. So this, I guess I kind of glossed over, but it should be more specifically defined. I would imagine that the definition of an unmanned combat aerial vehicle is not something that is autonomous, I would contend, or something that is unpiloted, I would also contend, because they are still piloted, but I believe the primary operating base for most drones is in like Las Vegas or something.
Okay.
So it's like it is think like the most sophisticated video game suite where it's sitting in front of computers with controls that are very much the same as aircraft controls, and they're controlling something that is halfway around the world. You using satellites and shit to like make it, actually react to the things that they want to respond. And it's supposed to be precise, but I think that's probably where the majority of error comes in, is like it is not a pilot with real time, to the millisecond control.
I love that level of detail.
That delay, I think, is where you end up with really good justification for like errors happen, and horribly injurious and deadly errors happen because of the distance and the lack of ability.
I love when I hate the fact that it's in this context, but I love when I come across facts that seem counterintuitive, right? You know what I mean? It's like you would think that being able to, I don't know, be away from, being in a controlled environment and being able to kind of, and having the intelligence and, it's so lightweight, you could get in close and stuff like that. You would think that the result would be that there would be less civilian death, less innocent death. And so as I was reading the same article that you were clearly reading, I'm looking for that explanation and I'm not finding it. Like, you're the first one who really kind of explained why that might be. I don't understand. Like, I don't disbelieve that the foreign policy article. I'm like, okay, I think that source is credible enough that they did their homework, but I'm not seeing it in the writing. You know what I mean? I'm not the explanation. So that was the clearest one that I've heard myself.
I'm sure there are other pieces to it. I think that there have been pilots and people that have gone on just in kind of anecdotal interviews saying that the ability of a pilot to intuit a situation is different from having drones, because drones are still reliant entirely on their equipment versus pilots can actually physically see the situation and things like that. So I'm sure that there are some differences and things to it. But I think I want to point out something that you raised that I had not considered before. So the definition here, or in the resolution, the wording is an unmanned combat aerial vehicle. That could also include autonomous. So unmanned could be actually unpiloted.
Right.
The thing is, I don't believe, and I can totally be wrong here, I need to do some more research myself. I don't believe that there's any precedent for autonomous weaponized aerial vehicles. I don't believe that we allow AI to make strike calls. I'm pretty much positive that still has to be a human being pulling a trigger, whether it's on the other side of the planet in Las Vegas or in an actual cockpit.
If we were in a debate round, I'm like, tell me where that law exists.
Yeah. I would have to look at that, because then you're right. Like the argument on autonomous combatants, right? Like an autonomous, like this is no pilot behind it, is the machine making the decision of who to kill and who not to kill. I am pretty much positive that we don't have that, but that's like, I would need to be positive to confidently go into a round on that subject, of course.
Man, like I know it's a closely related topic, but it is a kind of separate topic. You know what I mean? Like the autonomous part, like it is a slightly different debate, because this one's about whether or not, because that's the issue I have on the affirmative. It's like, why is that the threshold, right? Like we have incredibly high flying bombers that cannot be reached. We shoot missiles off from miles and miles away,
like from submarines.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, why is it that all of a sudden Las Vegas is the line where it's like, oh, we can't cross that? I guess we're kind of transitioning into the negative, you know what I mean? But this is like, I mean, like, the thing is, I'm looking for that information, so that's why I'm asking the question. I'm not saying that there's no good reason. It's just like, I'd like to cite a source. I'd like to see somebody else's thoughts on this, because I don't think I could articulate it very well. But
I think that's I think still the best case on the plan. On the government side, your most straight up argument, unless you wanted to go down the route, because I do think like autonomous fits within that definition. I think it may be unnecessarily restrictive and you may get into some sticky topicality ground. But I think the very straightforward answer is that drones cause more civilian casualty than piloted aircraft, therefore they should be removed. Here's a whole bunch of explanation, and then you can get into like Taliban recruiters, or no, it was ISIS recruiters, like were pointing out that drones were one of the best resources for recruitment. Like they were one of the easiest ways to recruit more ISIS combatants, was pointing out that like, yeah, when regular people living in their towns have drones flying overhead, like that is a major source of legitimate trauma. Like just seeing that at any second you could be vaporized by one of these drones. That's a great source of recruitment, of like, fight back against this evil power.
I did come across
right over you.
More than one article talking about the PTSD effects of drones, and I think that's an incredible argument to include in your first affirmative. I think that's a great discussion to include. But definitely just the stats are probably the most startling part of it. You know what I mean? It's like, I put that up front. Just put that up front. You know what I mean? It's like, it doesn't work. You know what I mean? Like when you got the stats on your side, it's kind of like, I'm winning. You better start thinking quick. And
that's the very straightforward, like, we're not coming at this with really anything procedural or squirrely or theoretical. Like, this is just straightforward. So I do think that there is a whole bunch of, and I'm sure the vast majority or the entirety of the tournament will be various fascinating theoretical positions on this subject of like, this is the nth degree, like this is the furthest evolution of the military industrial complex towards literally like tools of industry, machines only are the things that are doing warfare and are like creating the greatest harms from extremely wealthy countries and like colonialist countries to the rest of the world of like taking resources, not even with their own hands. So like the removal of humans from the violence that they're causing. And so that kind of like the dehumanization of other groups and things. So I think you can get into some pretty messy grounds there of like how problematic that is, and have really good positions to be able to say, like, on the affirmative side, it is unfair for us to even argue this. We so disagree with this position that like you're telling us to limit something when the entire activity is heinous. Like we're not going to defend any of it, and therefore here's something else we should be talking about instead, and just completely shift where that advocacy goes.
I think I want to transition to some negative discussion.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, I think there's, I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but I think there's room to just have, you know, like gender discussions on this one. They use the unmanned.
Yeah, I'm actually pretty surprised with that too. Like unpiloted is a perfectly acceptable use.
Well, but it's not unpiloted, right?
I'm saying like unpiloted is a perfectly acceptable term in place of the word unmanned, but the word unmanned exists in the resolution.
No, but even remotely operated stuff would be considered piloted.
Okay, so where are you getting the gender then? Maybe I miss.
No. Unmanned is the gendered one. I'm saying it's like, but unpiloted wouldn't be the alternative. Remotely operated would be the alternative.
Sure.
So if you're doing that, So that's what I was going. It wasn't on the unmanned part. It was the alternative where we were. All right, and so, but yeah, I am seeing a lot in the literature though. So I'll give a little bit of grace on that. I'm like, okay, you know, there's like a wiki on it, and there's a lot, and there's an acronym, the UCAV. I don't know. I wonder if they call it UCAV.
I only actually ever see UAV. I don't think I've ever really read up on UCAVs. Certainly the difference between surveillance and combat. So,
well, yeah, I mean, you have to have some sort of like, from at least what I saw was you got to have some sort of offensive weaponry built into the drone
in order to be a combat drone. Yes.
Right. It could be for surveillance, but it has a freaking missile on it, so it's a combat aerial vehicle. So you see,
right, there exists. I think like the majority of drones, or a lot of drones that are used right now, are surveillance drones. So like some of the articles and things I read was like the efficacy of drones relies, or I guess it lies best as a complement to piloted aircraft. So no weaponized drones, only surveillance drones, because they add better intelligence to piloted aircraft that can make the decision whether or not to strike. Like,
so that strikes me as like an affirmative response. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, you know, the negative is going to say, oh, well, you're going to remove like our surveillance capabilities, and the affirmative goes, no.
Yeah,
it's only combat ones, right? Well, I wish people would see this more. That takes away your solvency from the PTSD advantage that we were talking about earlier.
Sure.
Because it's still a fucking drone.
Yeah, it's the presence of the drone that causes the harm.
So
not like whether or not it has the thing that's attached to it.
Like, these are the moments I love a debate where, like, one answer, while it does fortify against the disadvantage, you lose on solvency. You know what I mean? Like you got to recognize that stuff. All right. If you're going to defend the use of surveillance drones, going for the PTSD advantage puts you in danger.
Sure.
Doing both of those at the same time, you got to be aware of that type of stuff. That's
right? a big fat case turn.
Yeah. Well, at least on part of it, you lose like at least half of your solvency, at least half, if not all of it, right? So, okay, but on the unmanned thing, so like I would think like remotely operated would be your alternative. I also thought the idea, the concept that the idea of a drone is also kind of sexual. I thought it was really interesting that you might be able to play with the term unmanned referring to a drone, because drones are supposed to be the males of the, you know what I mean?
Bee colonies.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then-
you know what I mean? And so I thought that was, if there's a way for you to play with that,
Huh.
man, I would dig on that. I would totally dig on that. You know what I mean? I think that's creative. I think there's like, you know what I mean? I think it's just, I don't know. Maybe I'm just way out of left field on this one, but
I think that would be very, very fun. I feel like that's like a fun debate to have after the round when it's like, all right, now we're just back in the squad room. Like, let's just talk about, like, this is a bugs debate. We're talking about bugs tonight. Like, just going in
well, I
different
mean, just
directions.
like, I don't know. It would still be a language critique, but you're drawing in the drones part of it. You know what I mean? It's like in juxtaposition to the unmanned part. And so, you know, clearly you'd be getting into it like a He-Man language critique of this term, right? But also like when people take the extra step to take it on to another level, when they're like look at what else we're talking about. We're talking about drones. These things are also sort of based upon a sort of gendered and sexualized way of thinking about war. And it's like, I'm like, oh my God, that's that's too much. But keep going. I want to hear more. Anyways, I'm sorry.
So part of where I think that
Good luck transitioning. Yeah.
Really. On the subject of wanting more, the discussion of the UN being the actor, I think, is going to be very easily just crumbled by the negative team. Like, they can just rip that to shreds right now because everything in the news is that the UN can't do squat when military action happens. Like,
yeah, I mean, and I think the neg also can predict a whole lot of evidence. Like, they could do the research on this, about specifically on this particular convention, about how, like, you know, Russia is objecting to, like, even just like large caliber sort of restrictions on this, and so they have like really topical solvency takeouts on this, like I would even say,
so like right this second, the UN is not able, like, there was an emergency meeting of the Security Council and Russia just vetoed it because they have veto power. So all you do is point out that, like, yeah, the US is one of the biggest users of combat drones, and so is Russia, and now it doesn't matter because the UN ain't going to be able to do anything. So I think, like, you've got some very, very timely, solvency takeouts, and, like, even just, actor counter plans of, like, no, it should instead be so-and-so, or wipe the entire slate clean and say, like, this entire debate is completely ridiculous because foreign policy around war is basically null right now. Like, we have direct hard evidence that's contrary to all of the machinations and theorizing of the last 40 years of foreign policy scientists. Like, political scientists are all, like, freaking out right now because what is actively happening goes against what they said would happen. So, like, we're writing some new stuff right now, and our kind of thought experiments that happen in debate rounds, I don't think our link stories hold water anymore right now. So I think the neg story just has some really solid solvency takeout skepticism ground of, like, everything in the news right now invalidates anything that the UN or some, convention is ever going to be able to solve.
So, yeah, I think I actually have a soft spot in my heart for solvency takeouts, and I think that those arguments I would really appreciate. I think they'd be great. I would be looking for, I'm like, you got any offense? Like, and so, like I appreciate it, and you might win on the defense, but you got any offense? This is not very well formed right now, but I if I had a bit more time, I think I would look into the uses of Ukraine using drones and how, you know what I mean? Like,
the entire world is sending them so many weapons. Like, it's just like a bottomless budget for here, take expensive weapons. I don't know, maybe it's too sophisticated to train people in how they're used, but, like, I would not be surprised if drones were not amongst those, weapons depot drops.
Oh, yeah. But
I mean maybe that's too sophisticated infrastructure to do, but, like, I wouldn't be surprised when the numbers are in the hundreds of millions of dollars of like stuff being given. And I think jets are in there too. So like we're not given, just the EU and NATO and the US, like it's not just guns that are being given. Like they're talking like very, very significant pieces of machinery, and that may include drones. So
yeah, but I mean,
so it could be
I
super
don't have
timely
the
arguments,
source.
I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have the source on me, but I do remember coming across information that Ukraine was able to use drones to like really stall or halt a caravan of Russians coming into it, and I think that would be pretty popular amongst a lot of people. They're like, oh, thank God for drones, in that
Yeah.
situation. And so whenever I see that, you know what I mean, I'm kind of like, okay, well, if people are saying Ukraine is using drones for good, then I have a little bit of evidence that drones can be used for good. And now you start trying to extract that, you know what I mean? Like, I think it opens up perspectives on how to look at it. It's kind of like, is it that the drones are bad, or it's like why we are using them, or how we're using them are bad? Or is there ways to use drones that are good? Can we allow for defensive use with drones?
Yeah. I think that now more than ever, you've got a unique opening that other teams that has never been available before, that I think you can go for just some very, very strong anti-war, anti-technology even positions across the board that I think
Totally.
would really weigh heavily and like have some real impact right now that like previously well written out shells just don't engage with, because you're using news of the last several days is really tragic it is to give a good strong argument of like all of this war discussion itself is what leads to stuff like what's happening right now, and allowing it to happen or whatever. So not that that's like the path, but I can see that being a, looking back on the 2022 NPTE debate. Oh yeah, the fact that it came down like, yeah, Ukraine, Russia was happening right then completely changed the entire landscape of the tournament, and everything shifted because advocacies were around what was happening live. And that more or less became like the crux of every debate. I could very realistically see that happening.
Yeah, and man, we're living in wild times, man. Wild times. A lot has happened, and it continues to happen in this world. So, hey, we'll be here though. We'll be here talking as much as we can about stuff to help you understand it as much as possible, make sense of it. Okay. Hey, that's our time,
Good luck to
everybody.
everyone at NPTE this weekend.
All right. Good luck to everybody. We'll see you next week. Okay. This is Tim, Jared for DebateSensei signing off.